What's your level of concern of a blockade of the Red Sea by the Houthi rebels, opening up another front in the war?
We'll see what happens. So far, it hasn't happened. It might happen. But we take care of things. If something like that happens, we take care of it. You know, we've done that with the Houthis before, and we haven't heard from them in a while.
Well, I think it's safe to say that President Trump is certainly hearing from the Houthis now, because the Iranian-backed Houthis have decided to escalate in this war against Iran. They have announced a blockade of Saudi oil shipments through the Red Sea's Bab al-Mandeb Strait. And by doing so, they are going to cause a lot of pain and suffering to the global economy by closing off one of the Gulf's few viable alternatives to the Strait of Hormuz for exporting oil. And this is very much part of Iran's strategy, and this was predictable, which is why it's so devastatingly stupid that Trump decided to dissolve the MOU and reignite this war against Iran. Now, the impact of the global economy on the global economy is no joke. This blockade would reduce global oil supply by 7% at a time when the closure of the Strait of Hormuz has already halted 10% of global oil shipments. Saudi Arabia partly skirted shipping disruptions by piping oil to Yanbu through the Red Sea instead. That was like their go around the blockade in the Strait of Hormuz. But a full closure of that alternative clearly is going to reduce global oil supply even more than it's already been reduced. And keep in mind that oil prices have already ticked up since Trump decided to reignite the war against Iran. The average price of gas in the United States hit $4 a gallon on Monday, the second time it has reached that mark since the war disrupted global oil supplies, according to AAA data. The price of oil also briefly rose above $90 a barrel on Monday for the first time since June. So this is meant to economically pressure the United States to end the war. And I'm curious, Glenn, if you think that it will be an effective way in ending the war.
I mean, I think that Iran has demonstrated an enormous amount of leverage that maybe they even didn't know that they had against the United States and have now discovered, which is one of the reasons why they've been so resolute in demanding terms they regard as favorable. I think one of the things that has gotten overlooked, Anna, is something that Trump said during the days after they signed that memorandum of understanding, where he was being, very vigorously attacked by not just Israelis, but a lot of the hawkish elements of the conservative party for having entered into an MOU with the Iranians that most people considered excessively favorable to Iran, essentially lifting the sanctions, allowing them to trade their oil, getting billions of dollars, all the things that Trump accused Obama of allowing. With the Iran deal, they basically allowed with that MOU. And one of the things that Trump said, kind of a moment of unintentional candor, was when he was defending himself from the accusation that he had capitulated to Iran. He explained, and this is something I've been hearing for weeks now, or had been hearing for weeks in the lead up to the MOU, and I do believe it's very important and central to the considerations here, which is that one of the reasons why, despite this protracted blockade of the Strait of Hormuz, that gas prices, that oil prices didn't go to say $150 or $200 a barrel or $300 a barrel. We didn't pay $8 a gallon at the tanks or $10 or $12. They rose, but not catastrophically, is because countries all over the world, including the United States, have strategic reserves of petroleum, which are designed as specifically to prevent, global economic collapse in the event that there's some disruption to the global oil supply. It was created after the OPEC crisis of 1973, when people had lines of gas going, 6-7 hours. And Trump said, and it's absolutely true, that because of the Strait of Hormuz disruptions, it was basically closed for more than 2 months. The world and the United States were getting dangerously low on the strategic petroleum reserves. And once that happens, there's no more oil. I mean, the Iranians have proven they can keep the Strait of Hormuz closed. Now you have the Houthis threatening to do it with the Red Sea. And that is major disruption. The world needs oil. The world relies on oil. Human beings need it for survival. And Trump was saying that if you allowed the strategic reserves to get too low, you would have global war. You would have global economic collapse and instability. And we didn't have nearly enough time to fill up those strategic reserves. Maybe we filled them up a tiny bit, but those have already been depleted. And so the leverage that the Iranians have is just as great now, if not greater, than it was that when Trump agreed to that MOU in the first place. So no one understands what the exit strategy here is.
You're absolutely right about that. In fact, some of the more hawkish commentators in the media are kind of furious about the fact that there doesn't really seem to be a strategy here, and the Trump administration hasn't clearly laid out what their goals are. Like, why are we in this war to begin with? Josh Hammer, of all people, I think the editor over at Newsweek was on Piers Morgan complaining about it. And he is one of the biggest cheerleaders for war against Iran. Now, of course, as any good neocon, he calls for a Machiavellian approach of declare what your goal is, go in quick, rip the Band-Aid off, basically cause as much pain and suffering and destruction as possible in Iran. And I don't know, he's under the impression that that will accomplish something that the Israelis want, something that the United States wants. But every military expert who isn't bought off by Israel or the military industrial complex says that there really isn't a military option here for the United States to end the war. It needs to be done diplomatically. But Trump doesn't seem to have the capability of doing that. And to your point about the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, you're absolutely right that us tapping into it has helped to keep oil prices relatively low. I mean, it would have been far more disastrous than what we're already experiencing at the pump. However, people forget that China also stopped importing oil and has just re-entered the market. They were tapping into their strategic petroleum reserves, and that was also helping to mitigate the demand for the limited supply of energy, oil in the global market.
Do you know your brain rot index? No, of course you don't. I didn't either because I didn't know what it was, but turns out you might want to, especially after hearing this. Did you know that the average American checks their phone over 200 times a day? That's about 5 hours of screen time a day on just your phone. Unfortunately, that means your brain is rotting a little bit, but have no fear. I switched over to Noble Mobile, downloaded their Noble Mobile Life app, and was able to track my own brain rot index. It's 0. No, I'm just kidding. My number was not great, but now that I'm on Noble Mobile, getting way better. It tracks how much you use your phone, how often you pick it up, and even shows you how to save money on your phone bill by using it less. New members can even earn up to $100 cash back for keeping their brain rot index under 100, which means you are very unrotten. Okay, so you unlock all that when you join. So download the Noble Mobile Life app today, track your own brain rot index, and learn how you can save money and spend more time doing things that actually bring you joy instead of doom scrolling on social media. Check it out by heading to tyt.com/switch or by downloading the Noble Mobile app. By the way, don't tell Andrew, but if you're on Wi-Fi, you also don't use your data, so you're gonna get money back anyway. tyt.com/switch.
And so we're in a lot of trouble, and I'm not entirely convinced that Trump is fully aware, because all of the military movements that we're seeing in the Middle East right now appears to show that the United States intends to expand the war, escalate the war, but maybe my interpretation or my read of it is incorrect. I'm curious what you think.
The problem with Trump is that he has so many different instincts and so many different factions that are constantly successfully manipulating him that it's almost impossible to know from one day to the next which of his many conflicting statements you're supposed to believe. And I don't even think he knows, frankly, until the decision is made. We've seen this so many. How many times have we seen him saying, "I'm done with negotiations. We're going to obliterate their civilization. We're going to unleash hell on them." And then 2 days later, there's some kind of a deal announced where he announces unilaterally that there's a pause in the threats or deadlines that he gave. Because Trump, for whatever else you want to say about him, he does have a kind of, like a lot of narcissists do, a very kind of sharp, almost instinctive understanding of self-preservation. He knows that a protracted war with Iran is extremely dangerous to his political interests, to his legacy, to everything that he wants to do. We're very close to the November election. It's already an uphill battle for him. If this war is dragging on, or gets worse, or there's more people being killed from American service members, he's almost guaranteeing not just the Democratic takeover of the House, but also the Senate, which means impeachment, investigations of all the little corrupt things or big corrupt things that he and his family and Steve Witkoff and their kids and Howard Lutnick and the rest have been doing. And I think he understands that on the one hand. On the other hand, although I'm not somebody who cares about what we typically call US credibility, like showing we mean business in the world and people better do what we say or there's gonna be a consequence. The people in Washington care, Trump cares. Trump cares about not looking like he had his ass kicked. And obviously if they stop now, what do they have to show for it? Nothing. That was the reason why people got so upset at this MOU, because we were agreeing to give Iran most of what they wanted and we got nothing, we the United States got nothing of value in return. That formula hasn't really changed. So the scary part is what happens if Trump gets desperate? What if he just decides, if he really gets convinced, oh, well, you know what? I can just unleash our military and get rid of the restraint that we've been showing and scare the crap out of Iran and then they'll surrender. The problem is that Iran has also been showing a great deal of restraint. They can destroy the energy infrastructure and gas infrastructure of these tiny little fragile US pro-US dictatorships in the region and absolutely collapse the global economy, to say nothing of closing the Strait of Hormuz and activating the Houthis. They have their own leverage. So it's a really dangerous situation, which is why it was such a bad idea to start the war in the first place, because you might think you were gonna get out of it quickly, but you don't get the only say.
Wars in the Middle East don't end quickly. He should have known better, but he
or well.
You're so right about that, exactly. By the way, I don't know like what weird timeline we're living in where suddenly I'm supposed to defend Al-Qaeda in Syria, but you literally have like Democrats defending like us giving weapons to Al-Qaeda in Syria. It's amazing. Anyway, that's beside the point. That's a totally different story. But our involvement in these Middle Eastern countries has been disastrous for the civilian populations of these countries. And I think Syria as a failed state is a perfect example of that. But just kind of getting back to what Trump is likely to do next, there are some who argue that Trump is signaling an escalation in war. And I want to give you some of those statements right now. So is there a possibility of boots on the ground? Administration allies believe that there are allegedly a number of military options that fall short of boots on the ground, including escalating the US naval blockade, which again, going back to doing a blockade of Iran's blockade or a blockade of the Houthi blockade that's currently taking place, or attacks on Iranian infrastructure, which has been happening, is not working. Iran is not going to respond in the way the US wants to these bombardments. But military experts warn that Iran is unlikely to respond to those bombardments. However, a source close to the White House told Politico, quote, "A good indicator of where Trump intends to go is his massive defense budget request to Congress. He wants to ensure the United States has more than enough capability to sustain any future operations if necessary." So in addition to the $1.5 trillion defense budget that the White House has requested, they're also requesting an additional $67 billion to cover the current costs that have been inflicted as a result of this war. Colonel Douglas Macgregor also notes that CENTCOM's air campaign looks to be designed to isolate Iranian ground access to Western coastal and island areas. And so he thinks this is a prelude to a US ground invasion. And this is the reason why Iran has been carrying out, in my opinion, incredibly intelligent and strategic targeted strikes against US military assets in the Gulf region and in Jordan, because if they are preparing for a ground invasion, weakening these military bases would be critical. I'm curious what you think.
Yeah, I mean, I do think Trump is the kind of person, and this comes even from all the decades he spent in real estate or negotiating Hollywood contracts, writing that stupid art of the deal or getting someone to write it for him. But it captured his personality, which is he believes that when you're in litigation, which is kind of like a war or a business deal, you have to threaten maximum destruction. Show people that you don't care, that you're not really invested in the consequences, that you're kind of sociopathic. So the fact that Trump is trying to scare the Iranians into believing that he may, and he's even considering actively escalating fully, doesn't necessarily mean he will for the reasons I described earlier. But again, the problem is that this kind of game playing in war is unbelievably dangerous. I mean, I'm sure most of your viewers know that the US and Russia came very close to destroying the world during the Cuban Missile Crisis through this kind of game playing, this kind of misperception about that the other side intended. And you could easily see unintentional escalation happening very quickly. These kind of, and this is not Iraq, this is not Afghanistan, this is not Libya, this is not Syria, all of which dragged the US into horrible quagmires and worse. This is a much more formidable, serious country in terms of their military skill. I do believe China and Russia are helping them to some extent. I was kind of shocked by the capabilities they displayed in being able to successfully attack our military bases in Jordan and Bahrain and Kuwait. I mean, these are places where we've had military bases for decades. You can imagine how fortified those are. And they just shot missiles right into our army barracks like they were nothing. And also showing these other states that these dictatorships that they can't rely on the US for protection. The one thing I do think it's really worth noting here is that the political cost to Trump will come from this increased gas price, but he's hoping to be able to get out of it or mitigate it. But also, if we start getting American service members coming back in body bags, that is when the public really starts to pay attention. And he's particularly vulnerable here, because unlike the Iraq War, which was supported by 70% of the population, as you remember, when it began, this war was very unpopular from the beginning. It was supported by only a small portion of the Republican Party and Trump's base, and it's only gotten way more unpopular since. So if there are now real costs that Americans are incurring, not just economically, but in terms of seeing service members killed, which we're now seeing and we will continue to see, because I do think Russia and China are helping them. Why wouldn't Russia do it? We're helping Ukraine attack deep inside Russia. Of course, they are likely to do that. That means Iran has even greater capabilities, and that means the cost of our continuing is even higher than it was, say, 2 months ago.
Yeah, I agree with you, your assessment on that. And just to go back to what you just said about, a crisis involving possible nuclear war. The US and Russia in our history is a good example, but what I thought was fascinating is what Joe Kent put out on X today, because he kind of warned about what Israel has been hinting at and has increasingly become more vocal about, and that is the use of nuclear weapons. He writes, just last week, Netanyahu was hinting, again, publicly, about Israel's nuclear capability, which has never officially been confirmed. Now, we all know that they have nuclear weapons. They stole our nuclear secrets. They stole our enriched uranium. We all know the truth. But in the last 24 hours, reports from Israeli intelligence claim that the Iranians have moved their enriched uranium to the heavily fortified Pickaxe Mountain, providing Israel with justification for potentially using a nuclear weapon. And just to elaborate on that a little further, there have been reports about how the US has been striking Iran and how we've been using our quickly diminishing stockpile of weaponry, including missiles and missile interceptors. And Murtaza Hussain from DropSite, in a conversation with Ryan Grimm just today, talked about how the US military has been using incredibly difficult to produce missiles, like they've been using it against like granite mountains in Iran. Now, don't get me wrong, Iran has been just pummeled with our missiles, and we've caused a lot of damage, which I'm not celebrating. I don't think that's a good thing, especially when it comes to their civilian infrastructure. But the ham-handed way in which this war is being carried out does not bode well for US national security, because what it's kind of projecting on the global stage, Glenn, is that what was making us a global power was the perception of our strength, but we're not really that strong. I mean, Trump gave up on fighting the Houthis not too long ago. I mean, we couldn't fight a proxy of Iran. What makes Trump think that you're gonna be able to beat Iran militarily in a direct conflict? Like, it's crazy.
One of the things that I think has not gotten anywhere near the attention it's gotten, and it's because our government operates in total secrecy. The national security state in particular is fortified with all kinds of anti-transparency mechanisms. They punish people who talk to reporters about these things. But if you have any contacts in the national security world at all, you know that, for example, even last year, when the Israelis stopped their war with Iran, that the United States briefly joined for that one night, but was of course a participant. I'm talking about the last war in 2025. The reason the Israelis had to stop that war, short of achieving their goals, was because they had to. They were running out of anti-missile defense systems and leaving Israel increasingly vulnerable, and not just Israel, but also those other Gulf state dictatorships. The US has been handing those out to Ukraine, had been using all kinds of them to protect Israel over all these years during the destruction of of Gaza, and they're very difficult to produce. They take years of manufacture, and it's unbelievable because we all know these statistics that we spend. Now Trump wants to spend $1.5 trillion. We've been spending close to $1 trillion every year in the military for a long time. All the statistics, 4 times more than any other country, more than the next 18 countries or 14 countries combined, depending on what it is. And yet we don't have munitions to even give to Ukraine. We don't have anti-defense systems or Patriot systems. We have to take them from South Korea and other places to which we had promised them and still don't have enough. It is amazing that despite how much we spend on our military, one of the reasons why we haven't been able to defeat Iran, which is at best a middle power, is because, well, I guess in part it's because Americans won't accept ground troops in Middle East countries, given the horrible history of those over the last 25 years. And that really hamstrings your ability. But also, it's probably a saving grace for Trump that that's the one thing preventing him from really getting sucked into a protracted conflict with thousands of casualties on American soldiers. But also, we just don't have the equipment. We built a military that Raytheon wanted, that enriched General Dynamics and Boeing, but that really didn't prepare for the kind of warfare that we've been seeing, for example, Ukraine and Iran, Russia fight, or that Iran uses with drones. We built these gigantic battleships and these very advanced, fighter jets that really aren't usable or don't have much utility in the current expression of modern warfare.
American taxpayers have totally been swindled by our Pentagon, by these defense contractors. And despite all that spending, which has sucked us into a tremendous amount of federal debt, we're not safer. We're actually less safe today as a result of the way we fund the Pentagon and these defense contractors. And it's important for Americans to wake up to that reality because that's our money. Okay, the government's taking it from our pockets in order to funnel it to a small group of already incredibly wealthy defense contractors. And the fact that we're running out of interceptors and we're still barreling toward escalation in this war against Iran is absolutely insane.
Every time you ring the bell below, an angel gets his wings. Totally not true, but it does keep you updated on our live shows.